From Washington, D.C., RFA Insider starts right now.
Today on RFA Insider, we start in South Korea, where President Yoon Suk-yeol declared martial law, only to have the National Assembly overturn it a few hours later.
That's right, we're going offbeat with RFA Korean to find out how this compares with the last time Korea was under martial law in the 1980s. And we'll, of course, bring North Korea into the discussion somehow.
All right, and then in the rundown, we'll talk to the investigative team about the recent China-U.S. prisoner exchange and run down what this means for each side in the deal.
Run down what it means? It sounds like we're shoehorning a second interview into the segment.
Well, you're the one who wrote it, Eugene.
Yeah. Okay, you got me. Let's begin.
靚生乜女話咪嚟提tập中為主題딴소리하지 마 어삐
저는 북한 공산 세력의 위협으로부터
In order to protect the Free Republic of Korea from the threat of North Korean Communist forces, to eradicate the despicable pro-North Korean anti-state forces that are plundering the freedom and happiness of our people, and to protect the free constitutional order, I hereby declare martial law.
비상계엄을 선포합니다. 이 비상계엄을 통해
South Korean President Yoon Suk-yeol declares emergency martial law in a late-night televised briefing. After the surprise announcement, soldiers advanced on the National Assembly in Seoul, and 3 military helicopters flew overhead. Yoon's move sent shockwaves through South Korea, which has been considered a democracy since the 1980s. Opposition party supporters gathered in front of the assembly, shouting, "Dismiss the martial law."
And that report was filed before lawmakers in the National Assembly that night overturned President Yoon's order. Yoon held a meeting with his cabinet and decided to end martial law, and it was all over in a few hours. Since then, the opposition has filed a motion to impeach Yoon over this, so we'll keep an eye on the situation as it develops.
But to talk about more of this today, we're going offbeat with the immaculately dressed Jun You, who's a media producer at RFA Korean. Welcome to the podcast, Jun.
Welcome.
Happy to be here. Excited.
All right, so let's start off with the obvious question. Why did Yoon declare martial law?
Yeah, so to understand why he did it, you have to understand the political context. This was a political move because it was the only political tool he had. So let's go back a little bit, right? His reason for declaring martial law in his speech was to eliminate anti-state forces and pro-North Korean state forces that were destabilizing the country. So that's the face of it. But on the political side, Yoon is not that popular. He's not popular in the National Assembly, and he's not popular nationally. According to the recent polling data, which was conducted last month, he's sitting at 17%.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, so that's very low. And President Yoon, his government, right, he's mired in many scandals. The 2022 Halloween crowd crush incident, and his wife, the first lady, is on the bribery scandal as well. So there's a lot going on. And at the same time, this year April, there was a National Assembly election where Yoon where his Conservative Party lost a lot of seats, and the opposition bloc gained supermajority, effectively making President Yoon a lame duck president only 2 years into his presidency.
I see.
Yeah.
So in many ways, this declaration of martial law, you're saying, was so that he could kind of maneuver politically to try to, punish the National Assembly that was maybe not going along with his policies as much as he wanted to. Exactly. So in his view, the National Assembly was stonewalling, and I mean, it is true, right? The National Assembly was stonewalling most of his agendas, his bills, and the National Assembly was also, led by the opposition bloc, was threatening to impeach some of his cabinet members as well. So it was a back and forth kind of fight, and the political landscape in South Korea was in a deadlock. So you can kind of make a logical argument that for President Yoon, using martial law, which is a legal tool that he has, it is a legal tool, that was his only political tool to break through the stonewalled, deadlocked assembly.
Was there a specific agenda item or bill he was trying to pass that triggered him declaring martial law?
The specific was his. Well, I guess you can say the National Assembly recently did not pass his budget bill, and which angered Yoon a lot. So, but that's just one example. It's not like the budget bill didn't pass, and he said, I'm going to declare, I'm going to go through this martial law thing. It was a series of events, series of scandals, low approval rating, stonewalled National Assembly, and then the budget bill was kind of the hate that broke the camel's back, I suppose.
Okay, so here at Radio Free Asia, we're supposed to, our mandate doesn't really delve into South Korean politics too much, so we won't go too much into depth there. But there is one thing where South Korean media and other countries' medias have been abuzz with comparisons to the last time South Korea was under martial law, which was in the period after Chun Doo-hwan took over the country in a coup in 1980. So I'd like to talk about that because these are two very different declarations of martial law. And so can you, for context first, what happened in 1980 and how is it similar and or different than what happened this week?
Right. So I'll do my best to really briefly describe the lead up to that. So in October 1979, President Park Chung-hee gets assassinated because of that political turmoil. Martial law is declared, but it's a region-based martial. It's not a national martial law. It's more region by region-based martial law. December of that same year, 1979, General Chun Doo-hwan stages a coup, consolidating his power. Protests erupts nationwide, especially among students. And then because of the rising tension between the protesters, right, amongst the protesters, between government forces, on May 17th, 1980, General Chun extended the martial law nationwide, and that is the immediate lead up to the May 18th Gwangju Democratic uprising. It was the expansion of the martial law nationwide, and it was more severe, shutting down universities, banning all political activities, and extremely restricting press movement as well.
And I think some people who may be watching this who are, maybe they were adults at that time, might remember clearly reports coming out of South Korea that looked very violent, especially in the city of Gwangju, which is in the southwest. And I think when we were planning for this, you said that you had some personal anecdotes that you'd like to share about that.
Right.
You obviously weren't there at the time.
I was too young, right? I was born in 95. But so I grew up hearing many stories of what happened. What made Gwangju different? It was not the fact that there were protesters, right? Protests were happening all across the country. What made Gwangju different was the violence of it, the brutality of it. So let me give one example, right? So my own mother, who was in middle school, I believe, who was in middle school, remembered that on May 18th, school shut down. There was a nationwide school shutdown. It didn't include middle school, but she got off school early because it was very chaotic, and she saw soldiers rounding up just a bunch of random men, bystanders, beating them up, questioning them, detaining them, just out in the streets, right? So this was a massive grab. There were. Because the government was very afraid, right? They saw a lot of young students as a threat. So any especially young men, were deemed suspicious, hostile. And maybe, my grandpa theorizes that, the Gwangju people are very emotional. So that's his theory. So the folks in Gwangju responded more violently. And then there were some deaths amongst the army side. Some protesters got killed. So tensions were rising. Mm-hmm. And then on May 21st, the paratroopers fired upon protesters, live shots, which prompted the protesters to storm police armories and then form their own civilian militia. So, listening to those stories growing up, right, how my grandfather went to the streets every single day to protest, how my own father, he was a college student back then, seeing his school shut down, who was very apolitical, who was not interested in politics at all, suddenly realized that politics is affecting his very lives, affecting everyone's lives, decided to protest as well. So I think that was pretty surprising. One of the stories that I love hearing from my mom every time was that on May 27th, 4 a.m., the paratroopers made their final push to a provincial office building in Gwangju, where the civilian militia was headquartered.
Right.
This was around 4 a.m. About 1 hour before, at 3 a.m., one woman in the civilian militia went around Gwangju town with a megaphone, begging people to come out to help them, begging them that to never forget the lives lost in that building, and begging them that the idea of democracy must live on. And I think it's just very emotional for people in Gwangju, and even though I was not alive back then, it's very emotional for me as well.
So what you described, I think, is safe to say very different from what actually happened this week, which, as we said, was over in just a few hours. What, if anything, do you think this says about how South Korea has evolved?
South Korea's democracy has matured immensely, and this wasn't overnight, right? It's not like the 1980 Gwangju Democratic Uprising happened, and next year, democracy everywhere, everyone's free and everything's free and fair. It was the Gwangju Uprising. It was a shocking moment in our national history, but it wasn't really well known. It took many years, decades, for that news to spread across the nation, and it took numerous protests to erupt in Seoul, right, in Busan, and in other areas to commemorate Gwangju, right. It took many efforts like that to put pressure on the government and people to mature democratically. And even after democracy finally came about to South Korea in 1987, right? Even after that, it wasn't immediately clear if democracy would survive. But South Korea went through many economic crises, political crisis, and democracy still survived. A free election survived. The environment where protesters can assemble freely survived. The press freedom in South Korea matured immensely compared to the 1980s, when back then the press was under strict control of the government. So it was a lot of evidence, right? The people's right to assemble, voting rights, and the free press, all kind of maturing together. And I think you can see the result of it on what happened 3 days ago in Seoul when President Yoon declared martial law, which according to his declaration of martial law, right, assembly is banned, political activity is banned, press is now under military control. That did not happen. People went out to the streets. The lawmakers gathered in National Assembly building to nullify the martial law decree, right, through legal mechanism. So this was So if that happened in 1980s, right, if President Yoon did the same thing back in 1980s, none of that would have happened. So I think it kind of shows the maturity of democratic principles and traditions in South Korea. That's what made it different.
And I think a lot of times when we hear the story, a lot of people are so quick to emphasize the economic growth that Korea has experienced, not just since the 1980s, but I guess since the Korean War even. And constantly they're calling it like the miracle on the Han, and the economy arose from the ashes. And a lot of times this narrative of becoming, a democracy from what is essentially a dictatorship, that gets pushed to the background. So I think in many ways, based on what you said and what many people now, I guess, analyze South Korea, they say that it's a more developed, one of the most developed democracies in East Asia, if not the world, right? So I think that's safe to say. But of course, as I said before, we're not here to cover South Korean politics or even South Korea that much. So we need to kind of put this discussion into terms of North Korea for a bit. So I would like to ask if the Korean service has any insight first into Yoon's claims, and when he declared martial law, he said it was threats from North Korea.
Yeah.
What was he exactly referring to?
Well, he was because that excuse has worked historically, right? In 1980s, when General Chun expanded martial law, he used the same excuse. There are North Korean forces, pro-North Korean sympathizers across the country. We got to use martial law. Same thing when the first South Korean president declared martial law, right? After the Korean War, nation was in crisis, in rubbles, and there are North Korean sympathizers everywhere. We got to declare martial law. So using North Korea as an excuse worked before, and which is why President Yoon, unsurprisingly, used the same excuse. But a lot of political analysts and think tankers agree that there is no basis. There is no truth for that in President Yoon's statement.
Would it be incorrect to say that sometimes, I guess, whenever somebody has political power and they will just simply accuse their political opponents of being pro-North Korean? Or is that something that the right always attacks the left for? Has the left also done the same thing for the right?
This is more on what the attack that right uses on the left. Oh. You're right. It is also a very political statement. President Yoon, who's very staunch, who was very against Moon Jae-in's sort of a more liberal policies towards North Korea.
Moon Jae-in being the previous president.
Yeah. He met with Kim Jong-un a couple of times. Very against it. And they're always accusing the opposition bloc, the Democratic Party, as a North Korean sympathizer, yada, yada, yada.
Yeah,
right?
you always see that during elections whenever they have debates. If you're losing the debate, then quickly you say,
but
you're
it's
North Korean.
It's a nice trump card, but again, it's a political tool.
Right.
So when he said, there are pro-North Korean sympathizers, that's why I'm declaring martial law. I think a lot of Korean people kind of took that as that's more of a political statement.
Right. So they didn't think that there was actual threats from North Korea then.
No, and in fact, after the martial law, the decree was nullified, after it was lifted. There was a statement from the South Korean Defense Ministry saying that they are observing North Korean troop movements and there were nothing unusual. So that's some good news.
All right. So staying on the theme of North Korea,
yes.
North Korea has very regularly used the threat of South Korea to advance. If something similar were to happen where Kim Jong-un were to declare martial law, could others in the government cancel that? Are there mechanisms?
Absolutely not. And I brought up a article written by one of our RFA's Korean service journalists, by Song Hae-min. She had a quote here that she has a quote from North Korean officials in China who witnessed all this event unfolding, right? And then North Korean officials said, in my country, being North Korea, the highest dignity is more powerful than the Constitution. Highest dignity referring to the great Kim Jong-un, the great leader. So, So I like that statement, right? That the basis of democracy is the rule of law.
Right.
That no one is above the law, and that law is applied equally to everyone, even for the governors, right? But in North Korea, Kim Jong-un is more powerful than the Constitution, and the word of Kim Jong-un is the law of the land. So there is no mechanism in North Korea, right, for people to assemble freely. There is no press freedom in North Korea. There is no democratic tradition in North Korea. And without it, the people there is no legal tool for the people to protest against the government and against the leaders. But yeah.
Or yes, and that's kind of ironic considering when you look at the name of North Korea, the official name of North Korea is the Democratic People's Republic of Korea. Yeah. But yet, if what you're saying is correct, then there's not much democracy going on at all.
Right.
I mean, they do have elections with 100% turnout, but usually that means there's only one candidate, and you can either vote for the candidate in a public ballot where everyone can see whether you supported the candidate or not, or you can not vote and then everybody can see that you didn't. And so obviously you have to support the one candidate that they give you.
Yeah, and our mission, right, in RFA is to provide free and fair information, unrestricted access to media to the people in North Korea. That is our mission. And I think I think the event in South Korea kind of shows it doesn't only highlight the governing differences between North and South, but also the importance of press freedom. Son Hae-min, right, in this article, further writes that people in North Korea most likely don't know about what happened in South Korea just 48 hours ago, and Seoul is only 35 miles away from DMZ. They have no idea what happened. They have no idea how the people in South Korea used, through peaceful legal mechanisms, overturned a martial law decree. That is unheard of. That is science fiction in North Korea. And I think, again, our job as RFA, right, is to provide some avenue for North Korean people for the free and fair information, for unrestricted media. So they'll learn more, they'll get inspired. Yeah, that's our job.
Yeah, to your point, I was thinking that, why isn't the North Korean KCNA or the Korea Central News Agency saying anything about this? Because it makes the South Korean president look awful, and it would be very easy for them to point the finger at him and say he's an illegitimate president and all of this. But then now that you mentioned it, they're afraid that people are very powerful in South Korea, and if we show them that that's the case, then maybe people in North Korea will wonder, well, how come we don't have that kind of power?
Exactly.
So that's an example for why they might want to not reveal what happened just south of the DMZ.
Yeah, exactly. And and all the quotes from this article, right? They are North Korean government officials in China, and it's a known fact that North Korean foreign diplomats have access to the internet. They have access to everything that regular folks would enjoy outside North Korea. So they know what's happening. They know what has happened. And it'll be very interesting, in my opinion, to see going forward how this will affect other high-ranking North Korean government officials.
I think that's a good note to end on. That definitely. Thank you very much for coming into the studio to talk with us about this today.
Yeah,
and
thank you.
Stay tuned for more RFA Insider. You're listening to the RFA Insider podcast, made by two real-life staffers at Radio Free Asia.
If you'd like to send us feedback, there are many ways you can do this.
You can send us an email at insider@rfa.org.
You can comment on our webpage at rfa.org/English/insider. Just click on the episode you're listening to and write your comment below.
Or you can send us a tweet at RFA Insider or visit us in person.
No, don't visit us in person.
Right, don't visit us in person. But anyway, we really want to hear from you.
So tune in every other Friday and we'll take you behind the scenes.
And tell you what the news really means here at RFA Insider. All right, so I'd like to thank Jun from the Korean service coming in once again. That was a very, very engaging discussion about what happened in South Korea this week. It's unprecedented. Well, precedented maybe 40 years ago, but it's very rare that you see something happening like that in one of Asia's strongest democracies.
It's good context because you see everyone reacting to it, but it's not even the first time this has happened.
Right, but now is the time in the show when we should start off with Podcast Free Asia. So today on Podcast Free Asia, we have many listener comments. Actually, viewer comments, because all of this is coming from the video of our interview with Mark Clifford from the Committee for Freedom in Hong Kong Foundation to discuss the trial of Jimmy Lai, which we did in our last episode. So, like I said, we got a lot of comments, but we have to say that, some of these were made in bad faith and probably meant to troll us, so I don't think we're going to respond to those. There are a lot of compliments also. We probably won't be responding to those either because we want to respond to some of the more substantive comments that give us something to talk about, at least today anyway, right? So our first comment comes from Lancewood1410, who writes, "Make an example out of the Western's tool, Jimmy Lai, LOL." So yes, I think we did establish during the interview with Mark that's exactly what the Hong Kong government is doing. We pretty much established that in that interview. And as far as him being a Western tool, I can't really comment on that, but I think that would suggest that you're suggesting that he's maybe a spy or a plant from the West. And I don't think that Mark would necessarily agree with that. You recall from the interview, we said it would have been much easier for him to just sit back and, be rich and not rock the boat. But he decided to risk his personal freedom and his wealth to fight up against what he considers to be unjust. So
yeah, I think even from discussion with the RFA Cantonese service, the resounding consensus was that he was very much like one of the Hong Kongers in that he was down with them protesting.
Yeah, so I can't say we totally agree with that comment, but I mean, you're of course entitled to your opinion. So let's go on to HK Lau MQ1UY, who wrote, "There is plenty of substantial evidence on the table to prosecute him being Jimmy Lai." I think you had a lot of things to say about this.
Not a lot, but technically, yes, that's true under Hong Kong's national security law because the law criminalizes anything considered as succession, which is breaking away from China, subversion, which is undermining the power of authority of the central government, and terrorism, which is using violence or intimidation against people, as well as collusion with foreign forces. So when you see how open-ended that law is, then I think many things can be prosecutable under that.
Yeah, we see that all the time in many of these, I guess, what rights organizations would call vaguely written laws where, it just has these vague charges but doesn't really list any specific acts that can really, underscore what exactly they're looking for. It's like, this person is of concern, so we'll take him and then we'll apply this law to him. And then we can just prosecute him for whatever and then retroactively say that what he did here violates this law.
Yes.
So, again, not that you're not entitled to your opinion, but thank you for the opinion because you gave us an opportunity to discuss what the law actually is, and that's what we did. Okay, so we'll go on with Chingwong B9W, who wrote, "It's doomsday when Hong Kong's sovereignty changed from Britain to China in 1997. No one has ever realized." What do you think about that?
It's interesting because I think the handover was really a cause of celebration for Hong Kongers. For many Hong Kongers, at least.
Okay. But also, I mean, there was also the phenomenon of a lot of people trying to get out before the handover because they were so worried about what would happen. So, I mean, of course, time will tell what will happen, but I think time has told, at least for an extent, as to, I wouldn't characterize it necessarily as doomsday just yet, but definitely.
Yeah, I would say, like Mark Clifford said in his interview with us, right? Like, he would have not guessed that this would have happened to, press freedom or maybe just citizen rights in Hong Kong.
All right, and the last comment that we will address today comes from Eddie Chan 2112, who asks, "Who funded Radio Free Asia?" That's a good question. So Radio Free Asia is funded from annual grants from the U.S. Agency for Global Media, which is also known as USAGM. Of course, the obvious question then is, what is USAGM and how are they funded? So the shortest answer I can give you, the USAGM is a federal agency which oversees 6 media entities, and those being the Federal Networks, Voice of America, and the Office of Cuba Broadcasting. And then there's also several non-federal networks and grantees, and these include Radio Free Europe and Radio Liberty, Middle East Broadcasting Networks, and of course Radio Free Asia, and others. So the USAGM's budget request is part of the President's budget request to Congress. But if you'd like more information about USAGM and how it works, you can always visit usagm.gov. Okay. And I think that kind of lays out everything. You can also look at the Wikipedia article, which more or less characterizes the nature of USAGM and how it works.
All right, I think you covered that one pretty well. Okay, so let's move on with the rundown.
All right.
The rundown.
Last week, the U.S. National Security Council reported that Beijing had released 3 imprisoned Americans, while China's foreign ministry in turn said that 4 imprisoned Chinese, including 1 fugitive of Chinese law, had been returned. Both sides claim that their nationals had been wrongfully detained.
And we have returning guest Tara McKelvey joining us in the studio today. She's a journalist with RFA's investigative team. And she's here to discuss the details of the swap and what it means for both the U.S. and China. Welcome to the podcast again, Tara.
Welcome back.
Thank you.
So it's been emphasized in the press that these exchanges are, quote unquote, rare. So why now?
That's a good question. One possibility is that President Biden is leaving office soon. This is the kind of thing that makes presidents look good. He's successfully finessed what's known as hostage diplomacy and has managed to win the freedom of 3 Americans and several others. And he's leaving office, so he can leave on a good note in terms of Chinese-U.S. relations. And certainly the way President Biden looks to the American people is very positive. President Biden has tried to be somewhat more involved in these negotiations with China, as opposed to President Trump, who's taken a much more aggressive attitudes towards China. So this is a way of President Biden also saying, look, engagement works. We got these people free.
Okay, so but I wonder when you mentioned that. So if China is trying to make Biden look good because he's going out, is that what you're suggesting?
I think China has nothing. They have their own considerations in all of these negotiations. I think this is a way for the people who work for President Biden in Washington and at the White House and the West Wing to say, look what our president did. This was a success.
I see. Okay.
Do you think this will set a precedent for the upcoming administration's relations with China?
President Trump, as everyone in Washington and around the world knows, has his own distinct style of governing. One thing that he specializes in is negotiations. It's very possible that President Trump will engage in some kind of negotiations with China in the future. Certainly whether it's about tariffs is definitely a possibility. But also it's possible that President Trump will try to win the release of other people who should be free, and that Mr. Trump may successfully negotiate with the Chinese on these issues too.
I see. So you mentioned to us yesterday when we were planning this that these swaps in theory usually tend to be, or they should be, 1-for-1. But in actual practice, what we're getting here is we're getting 3 Americans for 4 Chinese nationals. So what's behind that?
The math, yes, it's a complicated math because these are human beings. It's complicated. Their own stories are very complex. But there's kind of a rough ratio where the Chinese officials have released several people, and it was all very, very tricky in terms of the mechanics. So, for example, the individuals who were imprisoned here in the United States, it was only once they were released from prison and heading back to China that the Chinese officials said, okay, you guys can go now. So that meant that the airplane in China, which had the 3 American citizens as well as 3 Uyghurs, that they were cleared for takeoff. And suddenly it was wheels up for them, and they were on their way back to America. In terms of the actual numbers, at first it seemed like it was 3-3. There were 3 Chinese nationals here in the U.S. who were released, and there were 3 American citizens who were released from the Chinese prisons. As it turned out, there were 3 other people on that airplane. These were Uyghurs, and they were released from whatever confinement or detention or what other situation they were in, and they were allowed to come to the United States.
Okay. I wanted to look a little bit about what these people were actually detained for, according to the governments that detained them. So I think that all of the Chinese nationals that were detained by the United States, it was on kind of espionage charges, whereas the other there was one drug charge for one of the Americans in China, or another accusation of spying, which actually ended up being publicly available information and things like that. So, what exactly in your estimation, would you say is the strategic value beyond political concerns of getting, I guess, what are considered low-level criminals out of China?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's officially known as a spy swap, which makes you think, oh, there's spies that are being swapped. But if you look a little bit closer at these cases, very complicated situations. In fact, probably the most prominent individual of all of these, whether they're U.S. citizens or Chinese nationals, was an officer who was imprisoned in the United States, and he had been put in prison based on spying charges. He was an officer for the Ministry of State Security, which is the equivalent of the FBI and the CIA in China. And he had been actually arrested in Brussels in 2018, extradited to the United States, and put in prison here and sentenced to 20 years. As you can imagine, for the Chinese officials, it was really important to get him out, because how could they say to the people who work for the Ministry of State Security, you need to do these dangerous activities, and it's possible you could end up spending the rest of your life in a prison in the United States. So through this gesture of winning the freedom of their Ministry of State Security officer, they were able to say, yes, this is a risky undertaking, but if you're in trouble, we'll make sure you come home.
So you mentioned that 3 Uyghurs were also on the plane back to the U.S., and of those, one of those was the mother of Nuri Turkel, who is the high-profile Uyghur activist. But this part of the exchange wasn't openly publicized by the Biden administration. Why do you think they kept parts of the exchange under wraps? Like, wouldn't this also be cause for celebration?
Certainly a celebration for the individuals who were released, and also, of course, for Nuri Turkel, for him and his mother, and for their family too. But the White House officials, it seems as though, according to the press accounts, that President Biden had spoken to President Xi about these Uyghurs back in November in Peru, sort of on the sidelines of a summit. But you can imagine why they didn't want to release any more details about these negotiations or what could happen, because at any point in time, it could have gotten all messed up and no one would have gone anywhere. So these were kept under wraps, and it was only until afterwards, as you say, that it turned out that 3 Uyghurs were on that airplane and that they had also flown back to the United States to freedom.
Okay, so of the 3 Uyghurs, only one of them was an American citizen. The other 2 are presumably citizens of the People's Republic of China. So what does that say about the boundary of exchanges like this when China is releasing its own citizens into U.S. custody?
Very, very complex. And even certainly the identity of the other 2 Uyghurs has not been released, but even their nationality has been called into question. We have heard that one is a U.S. citizen. We're hoping to confirm that. Sometimes, as you may know, when U.S. citizens return to China, the Chinese officials then claim them as their own, meaning that they deny even that they are U.S. citizens. They say what matters is that they're Chinese nationals, and that's how they treat the individuals who are there. So the question even of citizenship and a spy swap is something that's debated by each side.
I'm really curious. You profiled Wang Shujun, who is the Chinese-American, I guess he was a pro-democracy activist who was accused of espionage for China and who was convicted recently. Do you think China would get involved in cases like his, even though he is an American citizen?
He is also a case that certainly comes to mind when you think about these spy swaps. Some people would say that Wang Shujin is not a big fish like the Ministry of State security officer who was released. But on the other hand, the American citizen who was held in prison in China and who was released, he was accused of being an FBI informant. And his role with the FBI is also kind of vague. That to the extent that he provided information to the FBI, it may not have been particularly significant or valuable pieces of information, but he was arrested in China as an FBI informant, and then the U.S. officials welcomed him home in that role. So what happens a lot of times is that the FBI wants to make sure that the people who are working for them can be reassured that if something happens, that they will also come home. And so whether or not they're particularly valuable to the intelligence services can sometimes be less important than the fact that they were of value, that they provided that service at all.
So like that level of connection.
Exactly. So just to quickly answer your question about Wang Shujin, it's possible that he could have also been included in this. His sentence isn't going to happen until January, but he has an ankle bracelet right now, and he's waiting for his prison sentence. But as far as I know, he's still in Flushing.
Okay, so another component of this deal, going back to the deal, the State Department recently, as part of it, they downgraded the travel advisory for China from level 3, which is reconsider travel, to level 2, which is exercise extreme caution. So how significant is that, or why would they do something like that? It feels almost arbitrary as to the original concern, which was that Beijing had exit bans and wrongful detentions, if that hadn't been addressed at all.
Certainly another diplomatic coup for the U.S. In the sense that they can now say it's safer to travel to China than it was previously. But people who work for the FBI or have worked for the FBI still say that there's a lot of reasons that people from this country should be cautious when they travel to China. They say that even though there may not be any, wrongfully detained American citizens in China now, at least according to the White House, it's possible that people who are traveling there could get caught up in this geopolitical spy game by being held at some point or for some period of time against their will for the Chinese government, then to use them as pawns in future negotiations.
I'm a bit curious about that part because it feels very ambiguous. Are there any kind of unwritten rules? Do they have to keep it at level 2 for a certain amount of time? Or could they just flip it back to level 3 at any point? Would that be going back on the deal?
Those rules and regulations are set by the U.S. government. but it's true. They are about as vague and wrapped up in secrecy as the spy game itself, and how those decisions are made are not particularly transparent.
All right, so part of this, the reason we have this podcast is to kind of highlight the personalities we have here at Radio Free Asia. And I just have to ask you, like, what is it about like spies and because you seem to be on the spy beat, and you recently gave even a master talk on how to cover spy stories. So what is it about espionage that just draws you to those kind of stories?
I think that these questions about spies, they get at the heart of what it means to be human. Some of my favorite writers, like Graham Greene, have addressed these questions, and they're always about betrayal, about what it means to be a friend, what it means to be loyal to someone, to be a lover, and then to be true to them, and then also to be true to your nation. And that sense of betrayal that comes up in spy stories regularly is such a core element of being human that it seems like through the spy stories, you can tell all kinds of other tales about what it means to be a human being.
You know, one of the things you mentioned when you did do the master talk, which I found interesting, was that you can influence people to talk to you as a journalist by, I guess, flattering them a lot and kind of buttering them up and hoping that they'll give you more information because of what you're doing. That seems like a sort of an espionage technique almost. So do you have any experience doing this kind of work before? Maybe not as a journalist?
It's funny. Well, in the CIA, I once asked somebody about this question, about what happens when they're traveling, let's say, in a dangerous country, and someone accuses them of working for the CIA. And his answer to me was, the more you deny, the more you confirm. So I'll leave it at that.
Okay. All right.
Well, that's like the core of the book, how to win power and influence people, right? It was like, just listen. People like to talk.
That's true. That's true. So is there any final words that you would like to have on this particular topic or on spying in general? Or
I think a lot of times in Washington, people forget about the human element to this. And right now, the Turkel family is celebrating because their mother is home. Another journalist here at Radio Free Asia said that he had talked to Turkel, a member of the family, the son of the woman who had been released. And Nuri Turkel told him that it was in November and he looked in the kitchen and there was his mom in the kitchen. And it was like such an astonishing moment and such a happy moment. And so that's, I think, really something to treasure.
All right. Well, I guess that about wraps it up for RFA Insider today. For Amy Lee and Tara McKelvey, I'm Eugene Huang, and we'll see you next time.
Like what you heard today? It would really mean a lot to us if you would like, subscribe, or follow this podcast. You can also share it on social media or even text messages. Feeling frisky? Give us a rating on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or elsewhere. Goodbye for now, and we'll see you here for the next episode of RFA Insider. Sure? Yeah. All
right. Find out how this compares with the last time Korea was under dang it. Okay. You know what? This probably won't be on video, right? So let's just continue. Okay.
And run down the list of prisoners. Oh, maybe not. We'll talk to the investigative team about the recent China-U.S. prisoner exchange and what this means for each side in the deal.
Yeah, so that kills the joke, huh? Okay.
Okay, wait. I can save it.
Okay. Fabulously wealthy, and it would be we let's go with some ice cream now.
No, I won't. I'm cutting down on sugar. I'm skipping ice cream for the first time in RFA's ice cream social history.
I'm gonna put chocolate on chocolate with more chocolate.
Is it sundaes?
Or the chocolate on chocolate on chocolate.
Yeah, like they put the chocolate with chocolate chips and chocolate syrup. It's delicious.